This is Lexi with Copper Bay, and I'm sitting here with my friend James, who I fortunately got to meet right when I moved to Grand Rapids about 9 years ago. He's one of the best entrepreneurs I know. Don't get too excited there, James. But kind of tell us exactly like where you started to get your entrepreneurial itch from back in high school, your story. Like I said, it just really intrigued me.
Yeah, so I definitely would consider myself entrepreneurial more than anything else. I have my hands on a lot of things that are related to mostly residential real estate. It started when I was in high school. I was working early, so my first job was kind of in the muck field at 12 years old, and we kind of got paid by what we did, by how we picked. So it was never too much of an hourly or a salary guy, and that kind of drove me to be motivated. To the harder I worked, the more that I got paid. And I have some uncles that had kind of small businesses, and I partnered up with him when I was a junior in high school. He had like a pressure washing and a power washing and a janitorial company. So when I was in high school, I worked with him, bought into half of his business. When I graduated, I ended up buying the whole power washing division, which we ended up, you know, building up pretty significantly here in West Michigan. I had my cousin working for me and did that for a few years. We did truck washing, house washing, deck washing, and part of that, I got my contractor's license back then because I could get better deals on deck sealer and paint and things like that. I got a contractor discount. So I didn't get my contractor or builder's license to build or do anything more than just get discounts at the paint store.
Right.
And but as I built that business, it was kind of seasonal, and so I had, let me say, 20 guys working for me, and I had to lay them all off in the summer. So it was really tough to get good help. And so as I was thinking about things that we could do in the wintertime, I met a real estate developer, and he was pretty active buying HUD homes, and he found out that I had a builder's license, and from a compliance standpoint, he had to actually hire out licensed contractors to do certain things to make sure there was no conflict of interest there for him. And so he was happy to hear that I had able bodies, and he's like, hey, I'll show you, I can put your guys to work, essentially, showing you how to do work in these beat up foreclosure HUD homes. And so it was a good match, and I learned a lot from him. That's kind of where I really started from the standpoint of getting involved there with real estate. He also was a licensed real estate broker and was also buying homes and keeping some for rentals. And so I'm like, hey, I like this. So I got my real estate license because I wanted to start kind of doing that a little bit on the side, and started, getting more and more of my time. I built my power washing company up to the point where my cousin was running everything, and I was spending most of my time in real estate at that point. And again, flipping homes long before it was popular on HGTV. I was flipping houses in Grand Rapids and all over, and started accumulating rentals and things like that.
At the time I met you, I think you had what, like over 150 rentals in the Grand Rapids
Yeah,
area?
yeah. I mean, early on, lending was much different, and so we could really just almost buy as much as we wanted to, without a ton down. We had to have equity, but that equity could be appraised values, and again, the whole industry was a little bit different back then. It was kind of the wild, wild west. And in the power washing side, where I was actually making a paycheck and it was kind of cruising and running along, my cousin, who was the one busting his tail, was like, hey, I'm either gonna start my own company or I'm gonna buy you out because you're over here in real estate land, and here I am, running this whole company. So I ended up selling that to him, and focusing full time on flipping properties and my rental properties and property management. And I got into lending actually because, again, this is all kind of in like a 1 to 2 year period of time. I was maybe 21, 22, 23 years old, and I couldn't find anyone that I could refer buyers to my homes that I was flipping, and they were all seemed like either on the golf course and driving around in their Mercedes, and I'm thinking, there must be some money in that industry for them to be able to do that and not have
Right.
to work very hard.
So
So
boom, we get our lending license.
yeah, so I got kind of a unique license at the time, because in the lending world, when you work, unless you own it, you really have to be a W-2 employee, and that wasn't going to work for me. So I got what was called a mortgage registrant's license, and that allowed me to work for a mortgage company and get paid as a 1099 contractor. And I really only did it for family and friends and buyers for my homes. So again, through the early 2000s, I just accumulated a large rental property portfolio. An uncle of mine, again, that I was partners with, another uncle of mine, who was a self-employed guy and sold his business and put $1 million up and said, hey, let's go buy a whole bunch more. And so again, we formed a partnership and bought a lot of rental properties, and most of them were not in great areas. I started out, and it was kind of like what I had learned was from the HUD home deal. So they were in some challenged areas of town, a lot of like Section 8 subsidized housing. And so that was my first like really deep dive into real estate, was buying a lot of those properties and dealing with the government and dealing with, that tenant demographic. And then I bought a lot of foreclosures and fixed those up again. And so one foreclosure I ended up buying that I was going to live in. And that was in like 2003. And it was a really huge project, much, much bigger than I ever anticipated. And so as the project morphed, I was like, okay, I'm selling off properties and I'm selling off properties. And with the equity I had, I was putting it into this new big home that I was remodeling. And it was like a 5-year project. But fortunately, during that time, as we were kind of coming into the downturn in 2007 and 8 and 9, I had sold a lot of my properties at that time, again, to capitalize on the equity to put into my home. And then, a lot of things kind of just converged in. The whole market changed. So there was I would say the most challenging but best wealth building part of my whole career was in that period of time. My mortgage income went down to almost nothing because there wasn't a lot of activity going on except for foreclosures and short sales. Right. So I really skinnied up my staff there, and the real estate industry went really, really skinny. And so really the only thing going on again was foreclosures. So I was probably one of the first people in Grand Rapids to really dive into what are called short sales, because mortgage companies at the time, foreclosures have always been a part of mortgage lending on a small percentage, but they had never seen the kind of percentages that occurred in the downturn as a result of the previous, 5 or 10 years of just bad lending, right?
Anyone with a heartbeat.
Yeah, I mean, you watch the movie, the Big,
Yeah,
The Big Short is a pretty good example of how times were, right?
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of exaggeration in that movie, believe it or
No,
not.
my favorite quote in that movie is, "I used to be a bartender, now I got a boat."
That's right. Yep. So, at that time, I started segueing from having a portfolio of subsidized and Section 8 housing to buying a lot of these foreclosures and these short sales specifically, where I was negotiating with banks and getting them for 25 cents on the dollar. And then I started renting them to college students. So I really got into student housing around probably 2008, 2009, 2010. This is when Facebook's coming around, and I was one of the first dudes here. Never went to college, but I had a Facebook account.
Heck yeah, you did.
And I was on the Facebook Marketplace because I was renting my homes on Facebook Marketplace. And at that particular time, education, higher education is always great, don't get me wrong, but it was really, really a high focus in the economy because there were so many jobs in the trades that were being lost. And they're like, hey, listen, you need to get in the education sector. You need to get in the medical sector. You need to get in some industry where you've got security, because look at these people and all these people in construction and in finance and in real estate that are losing, a lot of what they've worked for years for. So college was booming. Student loans were still rolling. And so, and I sold homes actually to a lot of college kids where, maybe a parent would co-sign for their child, and then 3 of their buddies or girlfriends or boyfriends would live with them. And then I still have houses to this day that we're managing for kids that went through college and still have that home, long paid it off.
Right.
And they're just cashing mailbox money right now, back from those days. And little did you know, because in that time, you never know when you're coming out of that hole. Because it sounds great today that I could buy things for 25 cents on the dollar, but you don't know in 5 years that.
Well, you didn't have your paycheck coming in.
No.
So it was kind of like you're back against the wall, like this has either got to work or.
Yeah, and I was building.
We're going to have to figure out something else to do.
Yeah. So I knew this when I had my Section 8 rental property portfolio. I was making maybe $200 a month gross cash flow. So not a lot. When I was running to college students, I was making $500 to $1,000 a month. So a much more cash flow there, and a much more secure position to be in. And to this day, we do a ton of student housing in the greater Grand Rapids area. But, as we went through the downturn, I accumulated a lot of properties, both personally, and then because lending went from being super easy to then very, very tight.
Right.
So
we went from the Wild West to the 2000 Truth in Lending Act.
Yep.
That you now have to comply
Dodd-Frank,
with.
Yeah, they got their hands and said, okay, we're pointing the blame on you, Mr. Lender, even though Wall Street was the one that wanted a lot of these mortgage-backed securities with zero qualifications to them. It just drove the industry, right? But we went from anyone getting a loan to very difficult to get a loan. So at that point in time, commercial lending specifically was dried up for residential real estate. So, I was partners, and I probably had 10 partners from those days. Hey, I got a great deal on a property. I already have as many loans as I can get. You can be my partner in this thing. All I got to do is be able to get a loan in your name. I'll find the home. I'll renovate the home. I'll manage the home. I just need your name for a mortgage.
Right, because you can only have up to 10.
Yep, you can only have up to 10 with Fannie Mae. So again, I have a lot of partners that have also done pretty well because they just said, okay, and jumped on that boat back then. But, as again, the cycle changes as you're coming out of that downturn in 2012 and 13 and 14, and the real estate market is starting to pick back up again. Now the regular homeowners are re-entering the market, and the real estate starts to pick up, and we've seen a lot of appreciation from the low point all the way up to, pretty much current.
Right.
And, those years have resulted in a lot of net wealth being built from the properties that were purchased then to now. And then during that time is when I started really, really focusing on my mortgage company, because as a result of a lot of those laws changing, I used to be a one-stop shop. I could buy a home, fix the home up, I could get you a mortgage, I could help you sell your current home. I was the realtor, I was the builder, and I was the lender.
Right.
Well, when a lot of those lending laws changed, I really had to make a choice between what I wanted to do, and because I had a young family, lending allowed me to kind of work remote. It was kind of the most technologically advanced, and I didn't want to go out and show homes at nights and weekends when I had kids in school and et cetera. So I chose lending, and we really kind of focused on that all the way through current. And I still am a real estate broker as far as my property management goes, but I really don't do any buyer or seller representation just because I have a lot of clients that are in that space, and I don't want the conflict of interest. But yeah, so at this point in time, I continue to dabble around. I continue to flip homes. It's not as easy to find the deals, but if it's there, I do it. I still am buying, plucking away at more rental properties, and I'm a believer on both sides of that fence. There's a time to be a renter, and there's a time to be a homeowner, and then a time to be an investor.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that and dabble in, I got a couple questions on that. But back when I did first meet you 9 years ago, right? We kind of talked about what the builder that we partnered up with was starting, and kind of what Copper Bay was going to do. And it started with very small. We're going to do 12 houses a year, right? And that's still a lot, right? Because we're going, you kind of rule in this student housing, right? You have other houses, and there's plenty of single family rental homes everywhere. But what you're going to get is a little iffy. We have no idea who the landlords are, right? Or you don't know if you're going to get the handyman special. Not through you, I'm saying through these other people, just in your standard market. So Copper Bay kind of comes in, right? And we own, build, manage in-house. And you kind of have gotten to watch me through the years go from 12 houses a year to 48 houses a year to now we're at 163 houses that we're building new every year. No, but it's it's been very cool to kind of scale, and you've kind of been the person I've turned to for, advice on how to, scale this a little bit, because you're the only one that ever had the pathway. I'm working with people who were in the for sale market that never really dabbled in rentals and didn't really know what they were doing with that. So just kind of from your perspective, seeing Copper Bay come in and really offer like an actual home to, whether it be a family, friends moving in together, that kind of thing, someone just relocating, like what kind of benefits do you see from something like Copper Bay coming into the market here in Michigan?
Well, just like me. So I think everybody finds their niche in real estate. Being a landlord, being an investor, is a big it's a big word, but really because there's a lot of ways to skin the cat. There are people that do really well in the subsidized housing space. There are people that do really well in the student housing space. You guys kind of have a unique space from the standpoint that because of the builder that is behind Copper Bay, you're in neighborhood communities where you have a lot of owner occupied influence. So I think the demographic of tenant that is more than likely entering your homes, it's a great transitional thing. There's a lot of flexibility where you can be like, hey, I'm moving into the area, or maybe they're younger and growing a little older and thinking, I want to be a homeowner, but I want to kind of just see what that's like, right? Live on your own, experience, what it's like to make your own payment, pay your own utilities, mow your own grass, have a neighbor that is your neighbor. And I think you guys have, the communities and the neighborhoods are great. You're not dealing with probably a lot of crime or anything like that. The properties are all brand new. So as opposed to a lot of rental properties that are in urban areas that may be 120 years old, that their pipes, you're banging on them to get water pressure and draining. A lot of the people that are renting your stuff are experiencing what it's like to own a new home, right? And so I think it's a good niche, and it gives people a good perspective of this is what it's going to be like to be a homeowner, and and the flexibility. Because when you are a homeowner, there's obviously a lot of benefits to being a homeowner, but there's a lot of flexibility and some benefits of being a renter too, that you're nimble. Hey, if you want to rent for 1 to 2 years and see how it's going, you can, and then you're out if you want to be. And if you want to be a homeowner from that point in time, you can do it, or renew your lease and live there for as long as you want. So I think there's again, not being 100% intimate about Copper Bay, but just seeing it from the outside, my conversations with you, I think there's some uniqueness to that there's not a lot of like single family homes or very low density properties that are new, right, that are out there. Usually if you're renting a single family home, it's in an older area, you're dealing with an older home, your repairs and maintenance, you're dealing with that inconvenience. If you want something new, okay, I can go to an apartment complex, I can go with something with 50 units in it. That's pretty common, but it's not very common to find what you guys are offering in that space,
Yeah. And a lot of people kind of sometimes look at Copper Bay, a big pushback, not even a really big pushback, as the older demographic are like, well, I could own a house for this rent payment, right? But if you take this, with interest rates and the age of the house that you'd be looking at, typically affording, if you were to go the purchase route, because you're on both sides, like how do you kind of define that, like, cost of home ownership?
So, as cost of home ownership, again, is kind of a loaded question. Where do you put a value on flex? There's monetary things. Like I can tell you, hey, if you're a homeowner, you're going to get appreciation.
Right.
Typically, right?
Yep.
Not every year goes up. Some years go up like crazy, like we've had in the past. That will change. Everything goes in cycles. There's going to be a lot of years where your property value doesn't go up at all.
Right.
There might even be a few where it goes down.
Right.
But say on average, it's going to go up 2 to 3% a year. You're getting that, right? Especially if you own your home for a period of time. You get some debt reduction when you make that payment. Part of that's going to pay off your principal. You get some tax deductions with the interest. So, there's there, but you're also, the pros and cons of renting sometimes can be the net money out of pocket is going to be lower. Even if you factored some of those things, depending on when you buy, you could still be at a better deal renting. Mm-hmm. You might not be.
Right.
But I think the biggest thing with renting is control and flexibility. And it's like, okay, I can always choose to be a homeowner if I want. And so if someone's thinking in the back of their mind, I think rates are going to go down and I want to wait another year to have that happen, or I need to save up more money, or I could probably afford this, but I don't want to push it. I'm going to go rent somewhere for a year or two and just really figure my options out. So again, flexibility, being able to maneuver and move is in my opinion, the big benefit of renting. I think when someone knows I'm going to be here, I'm not going anywhere, I want to be in this school district, this area, I'm settled in financially, I can afford my payment, I think homeownership usually wins those conversations. But that's an evolution. That's not usually coming out of high school, out of college, into a new relationship, and you're right there, right? And you can avoid some of the pitfalls of buying a bad first home by just kind of putting your toes in the water before you jump in and dive off the diving board. So I think that's probably as simple as it is. And timing it, the ironic thing is it doesn't matter if you talk to the smartest real estate guy in the world or a newbie, there is so much unknown about where things are going, right? I would say there's been a lot of people that have been on the fence and waiting, like, I'm going to wait a little longer to buy a home.
For the whole time I've known you, for 9 years,
Yeah.
it's going to crash, it's going to crash, it's
Yeah.
going to crash. But yet, I like to look at the data points, right? 2008, they stopped lending money to builders, like small builders, right? And then a lot of the trade partners, went south. So we didn't have a lot, specifically up here, right? But and then you look at like the average age of like a typical trade partner, it hasn't like stayed the same. It's gone to be like, the average trade partner is like 46 years old because new people haven't come in and taken over these spots. And I think that there's quite a deficit of homes that were being built for about the last decade.
And there still is.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the people being born and the people passing and the homes built,
Right.
we are definitely underbuilt. You know what I mean?
And then we'll loop into it on top of that, right? So through 2008, all these short sales and foreclosures, those have all, they've matured at this point and those have fallen off records. So all these people who have had to wait for 7-8 years to kind of come back into the market, they're kind of everybody's kind of sitting on the sidelines, including the people who bought their first house to get into, maybe even back in 2020, where a lot of people were just scooping them up because they're like, well, we won't be here forever. Fast forward 5 years, interest rates went from 3 to 7%, and everybody's waiting. So what do you see kind of, obviously you don't know what's going to happen, but what from your opinion, what do you think could happen from that? Or why would we not go into it? I don't foresee personally another downturn like 2008.
Well, I think that if you look at, first of all, I'm a believer that we're always going to go in cycles. We will have a downturn. We will have a slowdown, but it will never look like the one that just happened.
Right.
It's always going to take a different form. If you look at what happened from 2007 to 2011 or 12 or whatever you want to call that as coming out of it, lending definitely was a big thing. The lending standards were so loose, we could teach you how to write your name and get you a loan with no money down and whatever it is, right? And there was literally no business that a lot of people had getting loans, and there was no way that we were not going to have a ton of default, which is what ended up happening. And with a whole bunch of default came foreclosures, and then they ended up taking over that. Now, lending standards currently are, I would say, very, very appropriate. People, for the most part, when I'm giving someone a loan, I would say 98 out of 100, I would give them my own money because it's a good risk. Like, I'm analyzing what they're putting down, their jobs, their ability to repay, their credit. So we're not going to get a whole bunch of people walking away from their houses
Right.
like that happened in the downturn, right? It just caused a cascade of bad things. But you don't know what's going to happen. Something else could happen. We don't know what's going to happen in the world. And there are things that are that at any moment, anything crazy could happen. And especially with technology today, I mean, it can throw the markets into a tizzy. And when the markets go into a tizzy, again, everything is a domino effect. And could that impact the real estate market to where it's like, okay, we have a whole bunch of people living in fear. And so then it just puts it down to puts the brakes on everything. Everyone still needs a place to live, don't get me wrong. But people can be like, I'm not buying right now. I don't know what the heck's going on tomorrow. I don't know what war we're going to be in. I don't know what AI is going to do. You know what I'm saying?
So they're all going to come to Copper Bay.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, if nobody's buying, prices are going down. Value is going to be there for the people that have the courage at that point in time to buy. Is that going to happen? At some point in time, there's something that's going to happen, and then it's going to come back up again. We're never going to live when things are great forever, and we're never going to live in the valley forever. You know what I mean? But the thing is we don't know when that's going to be. And on the whole, things will go this way. But whether we have a bunch of these and then up and, it's just trying to be fortunate and intelligent with not selling on this, buying on this, and then selling on this if you're going to sell.
So one of the really big benefits that I know that, Copper Bay has had with your company and what we've had with our builder is we know that we're not going to be someone's forever home. We're happy to have them as long as they'd love to be with us. Your average person's been with us for about 4.5 years. If we take all 9 years that we've had, that's our average length of tenancy. But I want to kind of talk through what we touched on earlier, which was them graduating something like Copper Bay or something like one of your rental homes. Kind of take me through how that works with that little route.
Yeah, so everybody's story is different, right? And whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, or 10, whatever it is, renting in a place like that, you could have someone who might say they have a bump on their credit, or they went through a divorce, or they just got married. They want to again experience what it's like to be a homeowner, but they're not ready to buy or able yet. So what we've done a lot of times is, we can give a free pre-approval to them and say, this is what it would look like if you bought this home today, right? And again, maybe they can't, maybe they don't want to. We can still give them a really good strategy to say, okay, this is what you want to aspire to. Right. This is what it's going to take to get your credit from here to there, and give them something to work towards. And they can still enjoy being able to live in the home that, hey, maybe they'd even buy the home they're living in. So there's been a lot of clients that we've helped that have started out as tenants and ended up buying the same home
floor plan with the builder.
That they ended up being in. And again, some of it was just they needed a credit strategies. Maybe they changed jobs. They went from a salaried job to a commission job, and they had to establish a couple-year history of that. Mm-hmm. Maybe someone just wasn't ready to take the plunge. They didn't like the payment as a homeowner. They could get a little bit better deal as a tenant for a while, but they still got to enjoy what it was like living in a new single-family home in this area. Send their kids to that school district. And
they end up following like one of the stories that I've had a few of them this way, which was just like, they've exactly what you're saying, but then they end up falling in love with like the communities in which they end up putting their roots down in, which Copper Bay, like you said, were like scattered throughout these homeowners' neighborhoods. And so the people really do fall in love with the people that are in those neighborhoods.
Yeah. So again, it's a good synergy. Like I said, I've enjoyed working with you and working with some of our mutual clients, and obviously a lot of them are, hey, they're just going to stay a tenant. No problem. But, we can be a great resource for them to give them free information and free numbers of what things are going to look like if they want to buy. If they're not in the perfect position, what is it going to take them to be eligible for that, the best terms possible? And, that's a win-win for everybody. Win for them, a win for, Copper Bay, be able to have them as a tenant for as long as they're wanting to stay there. And then of course we can help them and give them the services we offer.